I had to add myself to the stage. That's interesting. Okay, so I am learning, definitely learning. All right, now let's get to it, Charlotte. See here. Okay, perfect. Now I can see it. All is well. Let's get to it. Says I can share my screen. Now, this first go round, of course, will be a bit of a learning curve for even myself, but that's not going to stop us. Siri wants in on the action. Let's see here. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to share my screen. There we go. And we're going to pull up. Yeah, we're going to pull up some information that we need right away. Let's go for it. Let's go to desktop, screenshots. All right. So, foremost, let's take a look at these election results here. So, Vilaus for the Democratic Party, even though we all know that is nearly wholly inaccurate, that she does not uh, conduct herself as wholly Democratic. And she is supported by Republican funds. We know that as well. She received 63,543 votes. Okay. Then Misun Kim, Republican, she received 18,542 votes. And Rob Yates, Libertarian, received 4,028 votes. And then there was a write in calculation for 306. And I think that that number is so relevant. I don't profess that numerology is the only way that we should analyze things. I'm talking about, of course, the deeper meaning of numbers as opposed to arithmetic. But nine is very, very telling. So we're going to dive into that. And it's going to appear as though I am verbatim reciting that which I have already posted earlier today. And essentially, I am. But I may add some additional commentary, and I welcome your comments. This is an open forum, even though right now there's no interactive nature to it at this point. I know that StreamYard does allow for that, so I will do my best to make sure that that is available in the future. But we'll go along with it. Also, take a look at the. Let's see here. Let's be very clear that this was a targeted, conspired uh, act, if you will. And if it were on the right side of justice, then I would be okay because there would be a unified front. The Democratic Party will give you the impression, oh, they will tout it. They're definitely probably touting it right now, that they have done their job and they got all the Dems in and everybody voted as they were told. And they did what they were supposed to do and did it successfully on the right side of justice. And that could not be more far from the truth. So we'll look at the numbers for the city of Charlotte City Council at large. And you'll notice that the numbers are effectually the same as for Vilaus. We're looking at 64,817 for Victoria Watlington, For Dimple, 64,602. For James, 62,033. For Lawana, 60,256. And then they incrementally drop off, but proportionally so, as it relates to the libertarian vote, 23,000 and 76. And then the write-in, 4,426. Now, I will say that I am very concerned that well, we'll get into this. This is very interesting with regards to the libertarian uh, ballot count, because there are more voters in this ballot count than there are registered libertarian voters. So we're going to go into all that. So sit tight. There are 321,000. So let me go back to myself. So that you can see me. If you are watching this, I want to make sure that I remain engaged. And if you're listening to this while driving or exercising, then of course what's on the screen won't be as relevant. Let's see here. But I'm gonna get the hang of this. Okay, so stop sharing. Yeah, see that I need that freedom to be able to share and then stop as I go throughout. All right. So there are 321,000 registered Democrats. Okay. Only 63,000 voted. We're talking about this mayoral race with specificity, and then we'll get into the other races. So 63,000 voted, effectually handing the seat over to Vilaus again, against the will of the people. Even more so, there are 776,000 total registered voters in Charlotte, America. So you know how I keep making reference to there are at least 500,000 registered voters. No, we're talking about 750,000. There are 776,000 registered voters in Charlotte of the nearly million people in the population of the city of Charlotte. So that means that only 15% voted. Only 15% of registered voters voted. A registered Democrat can vote for a Republican or Libertarian candidate. So that's important again for the statement that I made earlier regarding the fact that there were more votes for Steve, the Libertarian candidate, in the city of Charlotte Council at Large race than there were registered Libertarian voters. Okay. That said, if we then apply that math regarding Vi's team and Spectrum News spouting a victorious landslide, egregiously so, knowingly misrepresenting the nature of it all, exaggerating the nature of it, she then received 8% of possible votes from registered voters. 8% of possible votes from registered voters. Anyone could have voted for any three of the mayoral candidates. A Democrat, again, we're going to repeat this so that it's clear. A Democrat can vote for a Republican in a mayoral race. A Republican can vote for a Democrat. A Libertarian can vote for a Republican or a Democrat. You understand this, right? We all understand that. We see it on our ballot. We can select who we want. 8% of registered Charlottean voters elected Vilaus. Of course, I recognize the literal nature of 63,000 being numerically greater than the number of votes received for the challengers, but her competition is not only limited to her challengers and instead a direct show of the people's consensus. And no matter how she or they attempts to spin it, the majority of the 776,000 registered Charlottean voters did not vote for her. And if we then scientifically assume that some, likely many, didn't vote in protest and thus intended their abstention as a vote, Vi was in truth voted out of office. I've spoken out about this many times because there is and has been research done to show inarguably that people are intending their abstention from voting as their vote. And in any other body, membership body, governing body that is based upon an election system, right? Parliamentary procedure, abstention is a vote. The people wanted no one in any of these seats, not even my race. So I'm not just coming for them. We're putting it out as truthful as it is straightly shown to us. And that deduction is much more logical considering drastic decreased public valuation for government and our voting system. And yes, that means their math ain't mathing. Spectrum is reporting all night, honey, or at least for the hour, I guess about the hour and a half that I tuned in, repeatedly reporting that the people have spoken and she's won by a landslide, referring to Vi Laus. But 19% is not a grand slam. 19% of Democratic voters, her own base, is not a grand slam. 8% of all registered voters combined, Dems, registered Republicans, registered Libertarians, registered unaffiliated. So 8% is not a grand slam either. In fact, it's embarrassing. And especially so when they tout such big talk. They are spinning the narrative in such an egregiously exaggerated manner. 19% should not constitute a majority vote. You've heard me speak out about this as well. Quorum, which is a minimum of the membership base voting in any election cycle, which is required under parliamentary procedure, Robert's Rules of Order. Excuse me, y'all. 'Tis the season. And quorum should then apply to our municipal, state, and federal elections. You see that quorum, without it, that vote in whatever membership-based body is having this election, that election is not deemed valid. And equally, this election and our most recent elections and any elections in the past for which quorum was not represented, was not demonstrated, should not be valid. Period. Regarding my race, clearly I didn't stand a chance against the libel that the Democratic Party decided to engage in steps in the furtherance of public corruption and political bullying against me. With the regurgitated, she has filed 162 cases in 72 counties. We all know that it's wholly falsified at this point. But yet they used it, they weaponized that libel, and it was sadly effective. But in all honesty, when we look at it realistically, if we're talking about influencing a zombie membership base, then it's not sadly shocking. It's expected. They dictated to their stakeholders, motivated by these lies, and directed even the few numbers of voters to vote against me. But worry not, my justice, unmitigated justice, is nigh. Then coupled with the unity ballot, who of course rallied their base to vote for their three faves. And I think that they did a really remarkable job considering the libel that was used against them as well by the Democratic Party. Now, for the municipal seats, unaffiliated data will be insightful, as there are now just as many registered unaffiliated voters as registered Democratic voters at 321,000 to 294,000. So there are 321,000 registered Democratic voters and 294,000 registered unaffiliated voters. Are we getting that? Let's go to the because I want to make sure, because it was astounding to me. I had not recognized this. But I'm going to show you what I discovered last night. So let's go to it. All right, I believe we have it. Let me make sure. Let me make sure. Well, I mean, of course, it's sharing my screen. So, okay, just making sure. Let's go back. Okay. All right. So let's look at this. We're on the second line right here. 321,321 registered. It's crazy when you look at this. Registered Democratic voters. 154,018 registered Republican voters. 203 Green registered voters. 5,920 registered Libertarian voters. Now, we're not going to go into the race here as far as ethnicity, but I think it is also is still very wise to consider that I am at least very impressed by the fact that there are almost as many registered Black voters, 236,000, as there are white registered white voters, 398. And of course, the dynamic is essentially the same, a 1-to-1 ratio, essentially, for gender-wise as well. Okay. Still not enough for Native American, 60 registered Native Hawaiian, 2,000 registered American Native Americans. We won't go into further detail with that, but we've got 776,000 total. It's amazing. And I don't mean in a good way. Now let's continue on. You guys, regarding Bill Fountain, and sorry, Bill, I gotta call it like it is, because he seems like a very kind and apt man. But in this region, his status as Christian white male trumps all. No pun intended. So the 22,000 votes for him are not shocking at all. I am exceedingly grateful, however, for the 7,000 voters who cast their vote for me. You represent the most intelligent of Charlotte, choosing not to blindly go along with the get along and actually vote for change. So thank you most sincerely. The good fight definitely continues, and I'll update you when I make a decision regarding the next office I intend to vie for. Now let's move into my race more specifically. Now, before we go on, I'll point out once more to make sure that I have completed my thought. You'll notice here that, as I stated, Steve, the Libertarian candidate for the city council at large, received 23,000 votes. Let's make sure I'm stating that correctly. Yep, 23,076 votes. That far exceeds the number of registered voters, registered libertarian voters, at nearly 6,000. So he received 17,000 of the voting base that were not registered libertarians. If that is not a vote in protest, then I don't know what else to tell you all. It's pretty obvious. That means that 17,000 people, at least 17,000 if we do the exact math, 17,000 Democrats and Republicans and unaffiliated voted for Steve to get in office. And likely in protest of the incumbents who have basically just been handed the seat with every election because we are not turning out the vote as we should. And whereas I understand where many are disillusioned, it is not helpful. It is counterproductive because of the nature and the purpose and the legal effect of the election system and the rules that govern it. Okay? So let's go on to my race. Three were elected. Come back here. Three were elected, y'all. And that was the purpose of the election, to narrow it down to three, right? Choose three. Well, were they elected or were they selected? Were they conspiredly selected? I argue that they were selected rather than elected by the Democratic Party. And of course, that entity is arrogantly ecstatic that the three it dictated to its zombie members to vote for were not outvoted by you. When we all vote, this is the only majority vote, period. But you did not vote. Ship received, and I'm referring to Lenora Ship, received the most votes for this race at 45,000. This is a nonpartisan race. And I've already explained that regardless of party, you can go in. On my ballot, I saw the Libertarian candidate and I saw the Democratic candidate, and I voted for Robert Yates. I can say that very firmly. I did not vote for Vi Laus. So it is possible. Do you understand? It is possible to vote in a manner that would be deemed inconsistent with your party, right? So unlike my calculations for the mayoral race, conversely or separately, considering both the number of registered Dems and Republicans, it is proper to consider those numbers collectively. So total registered voters, will go to it again, 776,000. Ship received 45,000 of those possible votes. Monty Witherspoon received 38,000 of those possible votes. Liz Monterey received a effectual equal amount of number votes, 38,379. Witherspoon received 38,393. It is inarguably evident that the Democratic Party voted as told, and most markedly based upon lies that they spread about me and other candidates. Not even 1% of registered voters decided this race. Actually, 0.06% of all registered Charlottine voters decided that these three individuals would serve on the Charlotte-Mecklenburg School Board. Are you getting this? Are you getting this? We cannot easily determine how many total voters there were because each voter had an opportunity to select up to 3 candidates. We don't know if all voters chose 3, or if they chose only 1 or 2, or if they didn't choose anyone at all from this particular race. Understand, you can skip seats. You don't have to cast a vote. You're not required to cast a vote in every seat in order for your vote to be counted. Y'all understand this? And if you don't understand it, now I'm clarifying it for you. So it's inaccurate to add up all the votes for this race, which rounds out at 300,000. We'd actually have to dissect each voter's ballot. If we scientifically assume that each voter voted for 3, which is not accurate, but we'll do it for the sake of having a baseline for analyzing the data, then it's more likely, considering low voter turnout in local elections in recent years, that more like 100,000 people voted. We can further infer this from the mayoral race, for which a voter could only vote for 1 candidate. So we can add that and get the total number of voters for this election cycle. Again, assuming that all voters exercise their vote to choose one of those 3 candidates, which is not required. I'll be honest with you right now. Complete transparency. In my race, I only voted for myself. So I'm telling you that it is possible for you to go into, any voter can go into the poll and they can vote for all the seats that are on the ballot. They can skip over certain seats in seats or races for which 3 choices can be made. They can only elect to choose 1 person, or only 2 or 3 or none at all, and skip that entire seat altogether. So now you understand, as I'm clarifying for you, that it would take further scrutiny to understand the full analysis of this particular race outcome. The pause is intentional. The silence is intentional. Ultimately, Vi corruptly won with 62,000 votes. 12,000 were cast for the Republican candidate and 4,000 for Robert Yates, Libertarian, totaling 78,000 voters. So now you see, if you compare the 78,000 voters to the 100,000 that we can infer voted in my race, you can see how that is a good estimation for the total number of voters for the school board race. 100,000 total voters of 776 registered voters. Remember, because any voter, any registered voter in Charlotte could have and was eligible to vote for the Charlotte School Board race. It is non-partisan. Do you understand? It appeared on your ballot. Now, we also have to account for, especially as a scientist and an economist, you all know that I have to have proficiency in econometrics and statistical analysis. And so there are other factors that come into play. These would be the coefficients for different variables in this particular scenario, or literal equation, if you will. We have to take into account voter education, whether a person understands who they can choose based on their party designation. Some literally have the understanding that when they go in to vote, they must vote a Democratic ticket and must vote consistent with the Democratic scorecard, if you will, or endorsement card. Some literally believe that. I know it sounds ridiculous to a lot of us, but some truly believe that that's how they're supposed to vote. And otherwise, they believe that that's how they should vote because they perceive and rely upon the Democratic Party as a verifiable source that is not influenced by corruption. And of course, that would be a wrong deduction, right? Then you have others. Here's an example. I ran into someone on yesterday at the Dollar Tree, and I said, "Hey, you voted. I noticed the sticker. You voted." And I was like, "Great." I jokingly said, "I hope you voted for me." And they said, "Well, what's your name?" I said, "I'm Tigress." And they said, "Yeah, well, I voted for you." And I fist pumped them and kept on and moving. Well, when I got up to the checkout line, the young lady, she turned back to me, and you could tell that she was baffled, and you could tell that she was kind of self-checking, in the regard that she wanted to make sure that she had actually voted for me. So she was kind of vetting her own honesty, if you will. And she turned back and she said, "Okay, so you were the one on the backup, right? You were one of the backup candidates." And I was like, "What? What is she talking about? A backup candidate?" There are no backup candidates, guys. Now, you'll notice that there were 14 candidates. So, of course, you could. There's a way, because it is all about computer programming. And some of you know that that is actually core to my background as well. Those of you who don't know, now you know. I started off in engineering, agricultural engineering at North Carolina A&T State University. And before that, I took HTML and C++ at Weaver Education Center during my high school studies. And so basically, the point that I'm making is that many of you were instructed by poll workers that because that race had 14 candidates, not all candidates were listed on the same screen. Now, what do y'all think I'm going with this? There was no legal requirement to list some of the candidates on one screen and then the rest of the candidates on the next screen. There was no legal requirement for that. There also was no programming, no computer programming requirement to list some of the candidates on one screen and others on the next. It would be a telltale sign that the computer programmer for our voting system is wholly inept if they projected, if they told the general public that they could not list all candidates on the same screen for each race to ensure that there was no confusion for the general public in casting their vote. Because unfortunately for us, we have learned that common sense is not common. And I'm not coming for this young lady, but we also understand that we don't all think the same. So whereas she may be intelligent in other regards, in this specific regard, she may have made, just a simple folly. And then in meeting me may have realized, oh goodness, maybe I didn't vote the way I should have, because she was on the next screen. So was she a backup candidate? Did I have permission? Was I allowed by the election rules to vote for anybody on the second screen? Were they the real candidates? And there are people who actually, they process that information that way, and it's not inherently wrong, but it is explicitly wrong. It is the wrong thinking. But we cannot have an expectation that everybody is going to think the same, right? So when we apply the concepts of human cognition and perspective and folly and unintentional mistakes and how we process information, based on this young lady, if she thought that I was a backup candidate somehow, and thus was confused as to whether or not she could actually cast her vote for me, there were likely others. And then this also likely impacted how people voted for other potential candidates in this race. Okay? So this is a very, very telling issue. Very disconcerting issue, in fact. There are other variables that we can consider. People that did not do their research, right? People who vote based on random selection. I'm just going to choose the first three that I see because I don't know. And I'm tired of trying to process and compare, do this comparative analysis. I'm just going to choose the first three and hope for the best. So they're a completely randomized vote. Then you have individuals who they vote by the last name or the names that stick out to them. Y'all, this is very serious. I need you to understand how human psychology works and varies. So there are people who literally voted on the basis of the name alone. Some motivated by prejudice, right? Stereotypical precepts. So they see the name Tigers. I'm not voting for somebody named Tigers. Are you serious? It's ridiculous. The name alone just sounds ridiculous to me. Some didn't vote for Lenora on that basis. Lenora is also not necessarily a common name when you're talking about prejudice and stereotypes. Monty could go either way. So Monty. Some people didn't vote for Liz on the basis that they had a prejudice for Latin Americans. Some, or Monterey more specifically. Even for Juan Enrique, he very likely lost votes on the basis of his name alone. People actually vote on these stereotypical precepts. That being said, you have other people who voted in a manner that was completely unjustified by normal thought patterns, if you will. And they literally kind of did the close eye, I'm going to select people even more randomly than choosing the first three or the last three. Some believing that maybe the next page of candidates were the underdogs or the backup candidates. I'm going to vote for the underdog, so I'm going to vote the last three on the list. Some voting for the first three, some saying I'm just going to vote for the three in the middle. There's so many other factors that can be considered. But those generally would be the less likely occurrences for properly analyzing the election results. And I believe that, as I have asserted, the 100,000 total voters is a good, valid inference with regards to my race for school board. And if that is the case, and it is scientifically sound and statistically sound and numerically sound, because math is a form of science, you do the math, Charlotte. 7.76% of registered Charlotte voters exercise their voice and their vote, and that is not the majority. It's not the legal majority, which would be quorum, and it is not the numerical majority, which would be literal. My last campaign garnered 55,000 votes, and I thank you for that. I was running for soil conservation district supervisor. The vast majority of individuals or voters to whom I spoke after the election voted for me because I was a scientist. That is another one of those coefficient based parameters, those variables in that statistical analysis, when you're talking about why people do things, why they value certain things, why they choose, they decide in certain manners. So they blindly decided, which is not altogether a bad decision making process, but they chose me on the sole basis that I was the scientist, the most easily recognizable scientist in the bunch of candidates. I believe there was another that was touting that he was a scientist, and instead he was a teacher of science. That's not the same thing. Please understand that. Okay. There are similarities, but a teacher of science in the third grade is not necessarily a scientist. A scientist is someone who actually carries out research regularly. It is, part of their regular course of education and professional activities. Okay. So whereas it was important and I appreciate those votes, I was hopeful that those 55,000 at the very least would return to the polls and vote for me in this race. And that's why I reiterated during this race that I also was a teacher. But of course, I didn't stand a chance against the libel by the Democratic Party and defamation, because the libel is defamation. And well, let me let me step back here a second. The libel and the slander. Defamation includes libel and slander. Libel is written defamation or defamation in the form of a written publication. And slander is defamation that is verbally communicated, right? Again, the pause is intentional. So I thank you so much to the hyper intelligent 7,307 people who cast their vote for me. I will point this out, as I mentioned in the beginning of this broadcast, that numerology can be significant. So, have you noticed that my numbers are always particularly significant? So, I'll view it as further inspiration to persist upon my run. And now you all should fully understand why I have named my platform See Tigress Run. I know many of you are laughing, Charlotte. I know this. Many of you are hurting. Many are disillusioned. Many are homeless. Many have unstable housing, even though they are in homes. Many are working 2 and 3 jobs. They're finding it very difficult to make ends meet during this time. Many are disillusioned by the legal system, the judicial system, criminal specifically, and even civil. I'll go into that in further detail. There are individuals who are being sued for committing violations of law that I've told you all about, that you should be concerned about in the Bible Belt, because these laws are on the books. There are laws on the books in this Bible Belt that do not conform to how society moves. For example, adultery, diminution of affection, which is basically someone, in particularity, a spouse suing a mistress, or it can be the guy, anyone who commits adultery with their spouse, and they can sue you and win. It's a valid claim for relief, for which, the court can definitely grant in favor of the injured spouse, because that is deemed a legal injury. We got to know our statutory rights here. We got to understand statutory law. And it's not going to change without exercising our vote, because that's how the United States of America works. So you've heard my song, my trademark, Ya Verás. And it means watch and see. Don't vote, more of the bad is inevitable. I don't make the rules, and you need someone to give it to you straight. CMS will not thrive with those elected, because the elected candidates are planted. As a scientist, I remind you that not all plants are positive, and instead invasive and destructive. Those who are already thriving in CMS schools will be what these candidates, especially Lenore Shipp, because that's what she did along the campaign trail, they will attribute the success of already thriving CMS schools, the privileged CMS schools, and the privileged students and parents. They will attribute that to their success in office. But those who have been struggling and oppressed and disenfranchised in CMS will unfortunately feel the burn of the furtherance of stagnation. CMS itself is not even 100% sure of Dr. Hill's approval to permanent status. And I pointed out severally that she lowered achievement goals, which is inherently manipulative and counterproductive. It's manipulative in that she wants to save her job, protect herself, by lowering the goal so it's more likely that the goal is achieved, thus giving the appearance that she has met the benchmark set and done for her job. It's counterproductive Because students are further underserved and unmotivated with lower standards, parents will not enjoy a collective, powerful voice, nor will the community. Sometimes, too often, one must experience the fullness of the reality of inaction to learn the weight of a lesson. You guys, my son has the full benefit of me. Even if you hadn't chosen me, it would have been 10 times better to just elect in those who challenge the status quo. Even the Unity 3. As I stated many times, you couldn't have made a bad decision generally by voting for any of the less popular candidates because they were definitely committed to transform CMS, and they were definitely against the corrupt status quo. Charlotte, you get what you sent for. You also get what you don't work for. I'll expound with a bit of an analogy. Pause is intentional because you're going to need this moment to digest what I've got to say. You see, Beyonce is popular, unusually popular, actually popular against the general consensus. Like the Democratic Party, CMS school board choices ship Monterey and Witherspoon. When people simp for Beyonce and pay completely to see her in concerts, they themselves are not elevated in so doing. Beyonce concert goers, or more specifically, the ticket buyers, because some that attended the concerts didn't purchase their own tickets. You see, they benefit nothing more than the concert itself, which many will argue is enough, but will privately and introspectively admit is not enough at all. Same applies with voting for the Democratic 3. Many of you don't even know much about these candidates. You just voted as told. Many had absolutely no understanding of how SB 49 must be kept in place to protect the rights of the parents, because the majority of that bill deals with parents' rights. And those 3 candidates that were elected all consistently spoke out at the forums, the candidates' forums, that SB 49 was bad for charlatans. So these are the individuals that you have elected to represent the voice of the community, because that is the purpose of the school board. So in that regard alone, they are wholly inept. The other candidates, even where they didn't have my expertise in law, nor that of, I believe her name is Claire, not Clara, who is the licensed attorney. Of course, I am not yet licensed, but we both possess a Juris Doctorate. So whereas the other candidates, aside from the Democratic 3, do not possess a Juris Doctorate, each one of them generally spoke out about the fact that they had, at the very least, a basal understanding that SB 49 was a relevant bill for the particular purpose of parental rights. And they spoke, when answering questions about SB 49, that were generally polarized to vilify the entire bill as a whole at candidate forums. So these PACs, these political action committees and organization, community organizations would position the question against SB 49 as if SB 49 in its entirety, were wholly bad. And that could not be more opposite from the truth. But these other candidates at least spoke in a manner objectively showing the juxtaposition of the validity of SB 49 regarding the components of SB 49 that need to be rewritten to ensure equity and inclusivity. So the 63,000, right? Let's go back to it, make sure. The 63,000 who voted for Lenore Shipp, make sure. No, I'm sorry. 45,000 who voted for Lenore Shipp, and then the total who voted for the Democratic 3 don't even realize the damage that they have done. They cannot be an effective voice for the community where they have absolutely no understanding of the law. And they have no intention of applying it. They made it very clear along the campaign trail that they don't have the efficacy, they don't have the training, and yet they're in these seats. And they will be your voice for the next 4 years. Let's go back to Beyonce. Beyonce is not even your voice. She doesn't stand out on civil rights. Are you kidding me? She said it best. Her revenge is her paper. The pause is intentional. Beyonce concert goers benefit nothing more than the concert, which many will argue is enough, but will privately and introspectively admit is not enough. It was necessary to repeat that. Same with voting for the Democratic 3. Many of you don't even know much about these candidates. You just voted as told. Many of you know that these candidates will not transform CMS, but you still voted for them in sync with the Democratic Party directions. This is a good time to remind you and set the stage that a referendum is not a Democratic vote. For those of you who don't understand what a referendum is, it is a directed vote. Back to the analogy. Beyonce concert goers, or more specifically, again, the ticket buyers, enjoy the thrill of the concert and maybe even the pics they took and social media posts to which they refer in years to come. Much like all the coverage from Spectrum News last night. Oh, they were having a good old time, and they were projecting it to be a good old time and a landslide victory for Democrats, excuse me. But that's it. Now what? Because winning the election, the winning of it is not what should be the focus of the election. When the winning in and of itself does nothing to serve the intended people for whatever election race is relevant. Do you hear me? Who cares if you won if you can't do nothing for us? Who cares if you won if you're wholly inept to serve the people that the seat enjoins you to serve. All of this applies to those who voted as told. The thrill of the self hyped win, which was not an authentic win on the merits, because you can't enjoy a merited win motivated by lies and deceit. So now what? Voters for these three will not enjoy any other gratification except self gratification. The CMS students at large will not enjoy any benefits in re-electing status quo incumbent and status quo conspirators implied by their conduct, except by maintaining the status quo for privileged CMS students and their families. So you went to see Beyonce. And tell me how your life is improved by you going to see Beyonce. I'll wait. So you voted for these three. And tell me, no. As a matter of fact, over the next 4 years, Charlotte, show me how your life is improved by these three. I'll be watching them closely. And I'll be holding you all accountable, as should you all hold yourselves accountable. And on that note, I have decided to resume my scrutiny of our legislative system, state by state, in my series, How to Form a More Perfect Union. And I'm delighted to share that I will be also adding political commentary for this region and beyond to my podcast, broadcast, which includes this one. This is the inception. This is the debut. Some of y'all are now woke, but you're far from awake. So subscribe, like, comment, and share, and join me. Kind regards, Tigress. And before I go, I want to share a comment that was posted under my post, this particular post. So everything you hear me saying, again, which I referred to in the beginning of this broadcast, is also in copyright form on my social media. I won't refer to her by name, but it is listed publicly. So I imagine she intends it to be public. But I don't like to call people out. It's not necessary. But her viewpoints are on par with that which I have already shared. So she either is reiterating things that she's heard me say and saying I agree with you, or she's read my post and then decided to share her insights, which are markedly on point with mine. She says, Charlotte, you get what you sent for. Quoting my post, she said, this needs its own t-shirt. Then she goes on to say, but I think the problem here is twofold. And so her but gives me the impression that this is her first time stumbling across my post and understanding my views and professional opinions, as opposed to her saying, I agree with the fact that you've made these same points in your past commentary and posts. But nonetheless, we're on the same side, so it's great. She says, but I think the problem here is twofold. Number one, the natives are over it and have either moved on physically or mentally. Number two, the transplants have no idea what's going on, nor do they really care, because the South is still less expensive than other areas in the country. Honey, a word. They don't give a shit. They're here because they are trying to live, honey, because life be life. And if this how y'all move, okay, y'all do what y'all do. Cause I'm focused on making sure that me and mine is straight. And it's understood. I'm not vilifying them at all. I am, however, holding everyone accountable. Because I can't do it myself. It doesn't work that way. You've heard me say it before. I cannot go in, even if you all were like, you know what, we support you 1000%, but we can't get to the polls because of this, that, and the third, and the fifth, and all the things. Understood. But also understand that I can't vote for myself 63,001 times to acquire the majority vote and win the election. It's not. Thank you for your comment. In the future, I guess I will refer to people by name. I will refrain from doing so, just out of discretion. But if you want to go back and look at the comments, feel free. Please understand that this should be a space of respectful dialogue. Say it with your chest, but be respectful. You can say it with your chest and say it how you feel without being disrespectful. That's my viewpoint. It also means that anyone receiving or reading someone else's post needs to understand that they don't need to be easily offended. That's how it works, right? These are very simple psychological and social principles. So until next time, I am Tigress Sydney Acute McDaniel, always intending full transparency, objectivity, and love. Until next time,